Hey everyone, today we're going to tackle a huge question, one that we all wrestle with. How do we actually live a moral life? I mean, really, it sounds so simple, right? But the more you start to dig into it, the more tangled it gets. So here's how we're going to break this all down. First up, what even is morality? Then we'll explore this idea of a universal preference. From there, we'll dive into a simple one-word law, see how that plays out in the Bible's moral code, check it out in action, and finally, we'll ask the big question: what if it's all based on an objective standard? All right, section 1. What is morality? You know, it's funny. We throw around words like good, bad, right, and wrong all the time. But have you ever stopped to actually, really define them? It's way harder than you'd think. Yeah, how do we know the difference? This isn't just some dusty old philosophical question. It's something people have struggled with forever, and it's a question you and I face every single day. Okay, so if you look up morality in the dictionary, you're going to get something like this: principles about the difference between right and wrong. Seems simple enough, right? But, and this is a big but, this definition has a huge problem baked right into it. The problem is, we use good and bad for everything, don't we? Like, this pizza's good or that movie was bad. Well, if that's all morality is, just a personal preference, then saying murder is bad is no different than saying I hate cilantro. It just becomes an opinion. There's no real solid ground to stand on. So, where do we go from here? If personal preference is just a trap, how do we find a more solid foundation? Well, we need a new way to define good, one that isn't just about what I like or you like. And here is the big idea. Moral good isn't just about what's popular, it's about what is universally preferable. And that means a behavior that every single person involved could, in theory, actually prefer. Not a majority, everyone. No exceptions. Okay, sounds interesting, but does it actually work? Can any behavior really be preferred by everyone? Let's kick the tires on this and see if it holds up. All right, let's take a really clear example: murder. For the test to work, everyone involved has to be able to prefer the action. Now, the murderer, well, they obviously prefer to be doing it at that moment or they wouldn't be doing it. So that's one person on board. But what about the victim? See, here's the catch. By definition, the victim cannot prefer to be murdered. It's a logical impossibility. The second they preferred it, it wouldn't be murder anymore. It would be something else entirely. So there's the contradiction. And boom, there it is. Since it's impossible for everyone to prefer the act, murder fails the test. It's not just bad because I don't like it, it's objectively, universally immoral according to this framework. It literally breaks the system. Okay, so now we have a test, a way to measure morality. But is there a simpler way to think about this? Is there one guiding principle that just sums it all up? Well, this is where the Bible comes in. It has a word for this kind of universally bad behavior: sin. But see, in this framework, sin isn't just a random list of don'ts. It's defined as transgressing or breaking a divine law. And get this, the Bible says in Galatians 5:14 that this entire complex law can be boiled down to just one thing. It says, all the law is fulfilled in one word, even in this: thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. That's not just a feel-good suggestion. It's presented as the absolute bedrock of the whole system. So this one rule becomes the ultimate litmus test. Forget the complex logic for a second. Just ask yourself, is what I'm about to do an act of loving my neighbor as myself? If the answer is no, then it's not universally preferable. It's kind of like the master key to the whole moral code. All right, so we have this core principle, but how does one rule turn into a practical guide for everything in life? Well, this is where you see that love thy neighbor isn't just a vague idea. In books of the Bible like Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, this one principle is applied to hundreds of different, specific, real-life situations. It gets fleshed out into a full-blown moral code. The idea here is that God has already done all the hard work for us. He's taken this perfect standard, love your neighbor, and run all kinds of human actions through it to see what lines up and what doesn't. The result is this incredibly detailed guide. Okay, let's see this law in action. How does it really work day to day? We're going to look at a couple of examples, one that's super obvious and one that's, well, a little less obvious to really get the logic. So on one side, you've got something like, thou shalt not kill. Super clear, right? It's pretty easy to see how that is not loving your neighbor. The harm is obvious. But then you have a rule like, thou shalt not covet. That's about a thought, a desire. How can just wanting something your neighbor has be immoral? And that is such a great question, because the answer really gets to the heart of how this whole system works. It's not just about stopping bad actions. It's about going deeper to the very root of what causes those actions in the first place. Here's the logic. Coveting is like a seed. The desire itself, the coveting, might not hurt anyone directly. It's just a thought. But that seed is what grows into actions. That desire for your neighbor's property can grow into theft. That desire for their spouse can grow into adultery. So the law isn't just punishing the destructive action at the end, it's trying to pull out the weed at the root before it ever has a chance to grow. So let's zoom out. What's the big picture here? What we've been looking at is a way of seeing morality not as a squishy personal opinion, but as something solid, an objective, unchanging standard. And that leaves us with one last massive question to chew on. If morality isn't just something we made up, but something that's woven into the fabric of the universe, something we discover, like we discovered the law of gravity, then what does that imply? What does the existence of an objective moral law tell us about our reality? That's a deep one to think about. Thanks for joining me.